Shabbat Shalom. They say that 100 murders is merely a statistic, but one murder is a tragedy. But it seems that there was one murder in New York this last week that has become much less tragic in the eyes of social media and other conversations. Indeed, it has become the butt of jokes as well as the source of much anger. I am, of course, talking about the murder of the CEO from United Health. Everybody is familiar, I hope, with the basic outline of the story, that one of the high executives in this healthcare organization was shot down on the way to an investor meeting and died. Don't worry, the meeting took place without him, which is still shocking in and of itself for the corporate culture. And yet, normally, when someone is murdered in the streets of New York, most people would go out of their way to say that this is a terrible, horrible thing. But if you have been paying attention at all to the national conversation following this particular murder, you may have heard a great deal of, well, I think the phrase in German is Schadenfreude. The Germans have good words for almost everything. And Schadenfreude is the German word for when you are happy at someone else's misery. And yes, it is quite like the Germans to come up with a word for that, but we don't really have to blame the Germans for inventing the feeling. They merely put a word to something that all too often is a common emotion among humans around the world and throughout time. But many people are quite ecstatic that a healthcare executive of this level has been brought down, judging by the evidence left behind, by somebody that was deeply, deeply upset at the, well, crimes that had been committed by this organization against millions of people. It is, of course, also quite ironic that we are talking about the death of one executive rather than the deaths of tens of thousands that were killed by the policies of said executive and said organization. But killing with the stroke of a pen never quite gets as much attention as killing with a bullet on the street. And that is perhaps why there are so many people in this country who are saying that even if they knew who the murderer was, they would not say, and that they are going to shed no tears for someone who could not shed any tears for those under their care that were denied coverage for life-threatening and life-ending illnesses. But we are not here to discuss just the American response. We are here to discuss the Jewish response. Does Judaism believe that there is a place for Schadenfreude? Are we allowed to rejoice at the death of our enemies? Not necessarily that this particular person was an enemy of the Jews. They were an equal opportunity denier of claims, twice the industry average, I should point out. But does Judaism believe that there is a place for rejoicing at the death of others? Sinwar, Nasrallah? Are we going to celebrate the death of these terrorist leaders that have perished over the last year? Hitler? Do we have a party on the anniversary of his death? Or do we have to go back a little further to find a party at the anniversary of the death of a Jewish enemy? I'm speaking, of course, about the holiday of Purim, right? We have a holiday to celebrate the death of Haman, right? Is that the point of that holiday? No. Excellent. All right, you all passed the test. What is the point of Purim? And don't tell me get drunk. We survived, right? That we survived, that we were faced with an extinction-level event, for the vast majority of Jews lived under Persian occupation at that time, and had Haman been allowed to go through with his plans, almost all the Jews of the world at that time would have been executed. And because of Esther's great courage and Mordecai's help, that didn't happen, and so we are able to celebrate. The fact that Haman and the others that were co-conspirators with him perished is not the reason for our celebration. We are celebrating the breaking of their schemes. We are celebrating the end of the threat that they posed. We are not celebrating in particular their death or, God forbid, their suffering. And this is the pattern throughout Jewish prayer and liturgy, because you may not realize it because much of it is done privately, but if you look through the Siddur, there is an awful lot of talk about the breaking of the wicked, about the shattering of their regimes, about the sweeping away of their influence upon the earth. We have it in the Aleinu, very famously in the final paragraph, which is often done silently, so as not to upset various host countries throughout our history. We also have it in the Amidah. Indeed, an entire blessing is dedicated in the weekday Amidah, where we have petitions again for all sorts of things, and one of them is a petition specifically for the removal of evil, that their schemes will come to naught, that their efforts will be fruitless, and that they will be humbled in the course of time in order that they not be allowed to act upon their plans. And of course, everybody who was here about 9:55 would have also sung with me, Ram v'nisa gadol v'nora mashpil geim. Okay, what does that word mean? Mashpil geim. See, this is the problem. I've always noticed that the songs we know best, we understand the least. What's that? Well, that's giborim. Geim in this case is more like the arrogant, the lofty, the high ups. And mashpil, they will be brought down. They will be brought down low. Right? So it's, I lost the melody. Mashpil geim umagbiya shifalihim. And those that are lowly will be raised up. So we will take the high and mighty and bring them low, and those that are low will be raised up. Now, in context, it is extrapolating from the incident of the Exodus, where we are recognizing that the high and mighty, Pharaoh and all of his cadre, were brought low due to the deeds of the Exodus, which we continue to celebrate at Pesach. But we are celebrating that second half, that those that were low will be elevated once those that were on high due to their wicked domination have finally been humbled. But you'll note throughout all of our prayers, throughout all of our songs, throughout all of the different sections of our liturgy and rabbinic instruction, we don't say they should suffer. We don't say we hope they will die. We don't say, God willing, they will suffer 1,000 pains and death from 1,000 cuts. We say instead, better that they should not be doing what they're doing. And if they are doing, better that we should be victorious over them so that they are not allowed to perpetrate their crimes against us or anyone else. But best of all would be for them to stop, for them to repent. That we see in a story in the Talmud of the great Rebbe Meir, that there were some, the Talmud uses the term ruffians that had moved into the neighborhood, and they were causing a great deal of trouble. And Rebbe Meir was obviously beside himself on how to deal with these no-goodniks that were now infiltrating his neighborhood and causing so much trouble. And he was wont to pray for their destruction. But his wife, Bruia, who is known throughout the Talmud for her wisdom and insight, turns to her husband and says, that's not right. We don't pray that God wipe them out. You should pray rather that they come to their senses. Pray rather that they turn from what they are doing. That is what the psalmist sings of. It is what God has taught. It is what is part of our culture. Not that we will glorify their destruction, but that we hope that they will recognize that what they are doing is self-destructive. Rebbe Meir changes his attitude, and lo and behold, they turn. They stop behaving as they were, and they become instead good and decent folk. And the neighborhood is made whole once again, not by their suffering, not by their death, but by their change of attitude, which was brought on thanks to Bruria's wisdom that this would provide a much more lasting, enduring, and indeed just solution. Throughout our Jewish tradition, this is what we seek. We do not seek to gun down those that we hate on the side of the road. Sometimes it's necessary, as in the case of the wars that Israel is currently fighting, to take up violence and to use it against those who are at this moment trying to use violence against us. But that does not mean that is our ideal. The ideal, of course, is that it should not be necessary for both our sake as well as for the sake of those that are at this time committing acts of evil. In Psalm 92, the Psalm of Shabbat, which we read this morning during our Pesukei de Zimra, and which we, of course, sang last night during Kabbalat Shabbat, beginning so famously, Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat. But if you read through the middle, you'll recognize that this is not a celebration of Shabbat the way Vayechulu is a celebration of Shabbat as a day of creation. This is not a celebration of Shabbat the way Vishamru is a celebration of Shabbat as a binding of the covenant between us and God. This is a celebration of Shabbat as a vision when evil will be no more. As it explains that evil may flourish like grasses, may rise up fast and seem unstoppable, but it also will have within itself the roots of its own destruction. That evil is ultimately self-defeating. Sadly, they will also take many people along the way, but in the meantime, we must recognize that it will not triumph, that eventually we will see the destruction of evil. And in the meantime, we do not wish for their suffering, we do not wish for their pain. We wish only that they be foiled, only that their plots and schemes, whether they be on the battlefield or whether they be in the boardroom, come to naught, and that instead what is right and what is good will prevail for our sake and for theirs. For then they will no longer be evil. Then they will recognize that there is but one human race, there is but one God in the world that created us all, and there is but one rule, that we should be just and loving to one another. That is not usually found by the mocking laughter when others have suffered. That is not usually found in the Schadenfreude that so many seem to want to engage in. We can understand, we can even, to a certain degree, sympathize with that feeling of pain that so many have had at the hand of people like the victim. But we must resist the temptation to go down that road, for then it simply becomes war against war rather than right against wrong. Violence is needed sometimes. In this case, no. But there is still a lot that can be done to right the wrongs that perhaps motivated the killer. Shabbat Shalom.